He handed me divorce papers with one hand and a check with the other. But the photo I pulled from my hospital bag made his billion-dollar world crumble in seconds. If you love stories where karma shows up dressed in truth, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is something I have never spoken out loud until today. My name is Noelle Baptiste, and I want you to understand something before I even begin. I was not a naive woman. I was not desperate. I was not someone who stumbled into a powerful man's life without knowing who she was. I grew up in a small house outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, with a mother who worked double shifts at a hospital and a grandmother who quoted scripture every morning before the sun came up. I put myself through nursing school. I had an apartment with secondhand furniture that I was proud of. I had a life that was quiet, steady, and mine. I say all of this because the story I'm about to tell you is not the story of a woman who lost herself. It is the story of a woman who was almost erased, and what happened when the truth refused to let that happen. I met Sterling Caldwell at a charity gala in New Orleans. He was third-generation oil and real estate money, the kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't have to. He wore it like a second skin. He was charming in that southern way that feels like warm honey, until you realize it's covering something bitter underneath. But I didn't know that yet. That night, all I knew was that he laughed at the things I said, he asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. And when the evening ended, he found my car before I did and held the door open without making it feel like a performance. I was interested. I won't pretend otherwise. We dated for 14 months. He flew me to Tuscany for my birthday. He introduced me to his world slowly, carefully, like he was preparing me for something. And there were signs. I want to be honest about that. His mother, Cordelia, looked at me the first time we met the way someone looks at a stain on a white tablecloth. His father, Reginald Sr., was polite in a way that felt rehearsed, like he had practiced exactly how much warmth to show and had decided not to exceed that amount. Sterling's friends were fine on the surface and hollow underneath. I told myself that rich families would.
Photographs don't show is Sterling's father pulling him aside during the cocktail hour, and the way Sterling came back to the table with something behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. I noticed it. I filed it away. I smiled and danced and told myself it was nothing. The first 2 years were fine. Not the love story I had imagined, but something I could work with. We built routines. We traveled. I gave up nursing to manage the charitable arm of the Caldwell Foundation, which I genuinely cared about. I was doing real work, helping real people. And for a while, that felt like enough. But the loneliness was always there, sitting in the corner of every room like an uninvited guest who knew the house better than I did. I told myself that loneliness was the price of a beautiful life. I was wrong. It was the price of someone else's secret. When I found out I was pregnant, I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time before I told Sterling. I was overwhelmed. But underneath the overwhelm, there was something that felt like hope. I thought a baby would break through whatever wall had grown between us. I thought it would make us real in a way that the wedding and the house and the life hadn't quite managed. I went to him that evening with the test in my hand and a smile I had been practicing since the bathroom floor. Sterling looked at it. He looked at me.
Cordelia arrived that afternoon to help facilitate. She sat across from me in my own living room and spoke about the settlement like she was doing me a favor. She used the word generous 4 times. She told me the baby would be provided for, that the Caldwell name carried obligations I might not fully understand, that this arrangement was really the kindest possible outcome for everyone involved. I asked her to leave my house. She looked at me like I had spoken in a foreign language, gathered herself slowly, and left. But the damage was done, and the pressure that followed was relentless. Lawyers calling daily, my invitations to events quietly disappearing, friends of Sterling's who had been perfectly pleasant at dinner parties suddenly had nothing to say to me. I was being erased in real time, methodically, from the outside in. And I was 8 months pregnant, doing it alone. I refused to sign. Every time they sent something, I sent it back. I don't know exactly where the strength came from. Maybe my mother, maybe my grandmother's scripture, maybe just the knowledge that I had built a life before Sterling Caldwell and I could build one after. But I held on. And then, one night near the end of my 8th month, my body made the decision that the rest of me was too exhausted to make. I went into early labor, and I delivered my daughter alone, with a nurse named Patricia who held my hand and didn't ask a single question about why no one else was there. I named her Celestine. She was small and perfect, and she looked up at me from the hospital blanket with eyes that already seemed to understand more than they should. While she slept in that little plastic bassinet beside my bed, I reached into the hospital bag my mother had packed for me. Extra socks, lip balm, a small bottle of lavender oil, a worn paperback I never ended up opening. And
Rosa wrote that she had carried a secret for nearly 4 decades. Before she married into the Caldwell family, before the oil money and the estate and the name that opened every door in Louisiana, she had loved a man named Henri Devereaux. He was a black landowner from a parish outside of Shreveport, self-made, principled, quietly influential in his community. The Caldwell family had made it very clear that Henri was not acceptable. And so Rosa had made the choice that women of her time and position were pressured to make. She let Henri go. She married into the Caldwell name. And 9 months later, she gave birth to a boy she named Reginald, a boy who carried the Caldwell name, but Henri Devereaux's blood. Sterling's father was not a biological Caldwell, and that meant Sterling wasn't either. Rosa had known that Reginald Sr. had discovered the truth. She wrote that he had confronted her about it years ago, and that they had reached a silent agreement to bury it. But Rosa could not go to her grave without the truth existing somewhere outside of herself. She had sent the photograph and the letter to my mother 2 years before she died, with instructions to give it to me only if I ever truly needed it. My mother, bless her, had tucked it into my hospital bag without saying a word. She trusted me to find it when the time was right. The time, it turned out, was right. I didn't move fast. That's the part of the story that I think surprises people. I lay in that hospital bed with Celestine on my chest, and I thought for a very long time. I thought about what this meant, and what it didn't mean, and what I wanted to do with it. I wasn't looking for revenge. I want to be clear about that. I was looking for truth, and I was looking for protection, for myself and for my daughter. I called my sister the next morning. Then I called a lawyer, not the kind who handles divorces, but an estate attorney named Clifton Broussard, who had a reputation in Louisiana for being the kind of man that old money families did not want to see walking toward them in a courthouse. Clifton reviewed everything: the photograph, Rosa's letter, the handwritten addendum she had included that detailed Henri Devereaux's name, the date of Reginald Sr.'s birth, and the parish where Henri had been registered as a landowner. And then Clifton started pulling threads. What he found changed. Henri Devereaux's family was still in Louisiana. Clifton found them within a week. Humble, private people who had no idea that any of this existed. And then Clifton showed me something that stopped my breath entirely. He had pulled Sterling's private communications through the legal discovery process tied to our divorce proceedings. And what they revealed was this: Sterling had known about his biological origins for more than 2 years. His father had told him, not out of honesty, but out of strategy, because Reginald Sr. had realized that Rosa's suppressed will might surface eventually, and he needed Sterling to understand what was at stake and why certain things had to be handled carefully. The divorce, the pressure, the lawyers on a Tuesday morning, the settlement with a confidentiality clause that covered all matters pertaining to the Caldwell family estate and lineage. It was never about Sterling falling out of love with me. It was never even about me. It was about Celestine.
My daughter, as Sterling's biological child, had inheritance rights that, if pursued, could force a full audit of the Caldwell estate. An audit that would surface Rosa's suppressed amendment. An audit that would surface Henri Devereaux. An audit that would pull at every thread they had spent 40 years carefully hiding. They needed me gone and silent before any of that could happen. They needed Celestine classified as a minor financial dependent, provided for just enough to prevent legal action, but disconnected from any claim to the estate itself. He didn't want me gone because he stopped loving me. He wanted me gone because my daughter was the one person who could legally pull the thread that unraveled everything. I was sitting with that truth, still processing it, still feeling the full weight of it settle into my bones, when my phone rang. I looked at the screen and the name that came up was not Sterling. It was Reginald Caldwell Sr., Sterling's father, calling me directly at 7 p.m. I answered, and the first thing I heard on the other end of the line was not a threat or an offer. It was a man crying. He told me everything, not because he had grown a conscience, but because he was afraid. He had spent months trying to trace who had Rosa's photograph. He had hired people to look into it quietly. And now he understood that it was already in the hands of an estate attorney, and that the suppressed will had been located.
I let him finish. And then I said, I'm not the one you should have worried about. You should have worried about the truth. It doesn't need my help. It just needed time. And I ended the call. What happened after that unfolded over the following months, in courtrooms and conference rooms, and the pages of Louisiana legal filings that nobody outside of certain circles ever reads. The Caldwell estate audit was ordered. Rosa's legitimate will amendment was upheld by a probate court. Henri Devereaux's descendants received what Rosa had always intended for them. Sterling, in the middle of contesting the audit, quietly resigned his position as head of the Caldwell Group. The board had little appetite for the scrutiny that was surrounding his name. Reginald Sr. withdrew entirely from public life. Cordelia, who had sat across from me in my own living room and called a settlement that was meant to erase me generous, had nothing left to stand on. And me? The divorce Sterling had pushed so hard and so fast to finalize, the one he had engineered to cut me off cleanly, had inadvertently positioned me as a completely separate legal party. I had no liability in the estate proceedings. I had no entanglement in the Caldwell family's unraveling. I was already on the outside of the wall they had built, which meant when the wall came down, it didn't fall on me. Clifton negotiated a full and fair divorce settlement. Not guilt money, not hush money, but what the law said I was owed. Celestine's future was secured, properly, with full legal standing. He pushed me out of his world to save himself. But by pushing me out, he handed me the door to a room he never knew existed. I'm back in Louisiana now. Not in a marble house with rooms I never used. In a real home, with light that comes through the windows in the morning and lands on the floor in a way that feels like it means something. Celestine is growing fast. She has my mother's eyes. And I think Rosa Caldwell's quiet stubbornness, which feels right somehow. Like the women in this story recognized each other across time and decided to take care of one another. I think about Rosa sometimes. A woman who made a painful choice in a world that didn't give her better options, and who spent the rest of her life carrying a truth she wasn't allowed to speak. She couldn't fix what she had done in life, but she made sure that the truth survived her. She put it in an envelope, wrote my name on the front,